You know, in the history of tech, there are some big mistakes. And then there's firing Steve Jobs. I mean, wow. It's this legendary story, right? Two titans, a massive boardroom battle, and a decision that literally changed everything. But the guy at the center of it all, John Sculley, he wasn't just some villain in a black hat. He's the man who fired Steve Jobs, but here's the crazy part. He also became his own biggest critic. And that's what makes this whole thing so wild. The harshest criticism of that decision, it came from Scully himself almost 30 years later. Just think about that. With one single admission, he basically rewrote his own legacy. You just don't see leaders at that level being so brutally honest about a mistake of that magnitude. It's really something.
So, okay, that brings us to the big question, right? How did this even happen? How does a marketing genius from Pepsi, a guy that Steve Jobs personally recruited, end up pushing the founder right out the door of his own company? It sounds nuts. To really get it, we've got to rewind and go back to the start. All right, let's set the scene. It's 1983, the personal computer revolution is just starting to explode, and Apple is right there at the bleeding edge. But Steve Jobs, brilliant as he was, knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a heavyweight, a real marketing pro, to help Apple become a true global brand. And he knew exactly who he wanted. And this guy, John Sculley, was an absolute rock star in the business world. We're not talking about some random suit. By 1977, he was the youngest president in Pepsi's entire history. He was the mastermind behind the legendary Pepsi Challenge. You know, that brilliant campaign that took a direct shot at Coke with blind taste tests. He was at the absolute top of his game. And this is where we see the legendary Steve Jobs magic at work. Scully, understandably, wasn't so sure about leaving his cushy job at Pepsi. So Jobs hits him with this killer question. It wasn't just, hey, want a job. No, it was a challenge to his entire life's purpose. And, of course, it worked. Just like that, Scully was pulled from the safe, predictable world of soda pop into the wild west of Silicon Valley. So you'd think this would be a dream team, right? Well, not so much. The honeymoon phase was incredibly short. It turns out the worlds they came from were just too different. It quickly turned into a clash of ideas, a clash of personalities, and really, a battle for the very soul of Apple. And if you want to see just how much things changed, look at this. It's staggering. Right after Jobs was pushed out in '85, Scully was telling everyone things were much better, super dismissive. But then you jump forward to 2014, and it's a completely different story. It's all regret. He's saying the board should have tried harder to make it work. I mean, that's a total 180. So what was the root of the problem? Well, according to Scully, the Steve Jobs back then was, well, he was Steve Jobs. A mercurial genius, a visionary, but maybe not the best with a spreadsheet. Scully, on the other hand, was the classic buttoned-up executive. He was all about structure, sales, profits. So you had these two completely different approaches. When they couldn't agree on the future, the board had to pick a side. And they went with the safe bet, Scully's pragmatism, over Jobs' unpredictable vision. And just like that, the unthinkable happened. So, Steve Jobs is out, 1985. This is one of the most famous moments in business history, for sure. And what happens next sends both Steve and the company he built on two totally separate and pretty dramatic journeys. And you think Steve Jobs just went home to sulk? No way. He got right back to work. He starts a company called NeXT building these super high-end computers. And the crazy irony is, the software they developed would one day be the core of Apple's own operating system. Oh, and as if that wasn't enough, he buys this tiny computer graphics group from George Lucas and turns it into Pixar. You know, the company that completely changed animation forever. So yeah, he wasn't just sitting around. He was out there building the future, just somewhere else. Okay, so what about Apple? Well, here's the twist. For a while, things actually looked really good, surprisingly good. Under Scully, Apple's sales just exploded. They went from $800 million to a whopping $8 billion. So if you're just looking at the numbers, you think, hey, maybe the board made the right call. The company was making more money than ever before. But as we all know, sales numbers aren't the whole story, are they? As time went on, Apple started to lose its way. It got messy. The product line was a total disaster, just a confusing jumble of different Macs, printers, you name it. They made these big bets on new gadgets like the Newton, and they completely flopped. The company that was all about thinking different suddenly felt boring. They were losing that creative spark, that magic. And by the late 90s, Apple was in real deep trouble. And this is where we get one of the greatest comeback stories in history. Apple is on the verge of going bankrupt. They're desperate. They need a new operating system to save them, and they start looking around. And guess whose company has the best one on the market? A little company called NeXT. So they buy NeXT, and just like that, Steve Jobs is back. And what happens next is nothing short of a revolution.
First comes the iMac, those colorful computers that didn't just look cool, they literally saved the company. Then, bam, the iPod and iTunes, which didn't just sell a lot, they blew up the entire music industry. And then, of course, the iPhone, the device that changed everything about how we live. It was just this incredible, relentless wave of innovation that sealed the legend for both Apple and for Steve Jobs.
And that brings us all the way back to where we started. Back to John Sculley, looking back on this whole epic story. The interviewer in that 2014 piece had one last perfect question for him. What if? What if it had all gone down differently?
And Scully's answer? It was so simple, almost kind of haunting. When asked what would have happened if Jobs had stayed, he just said, very good things. That's it. It's this incredible admission, right? He's acknowledging this huge, colossal talent that was pushed out the door and just hinting at this alternate history that we'll just never know. So that's where we're left. You have to wonder, right? Was forcing Jobs out just a clear-cut, terrible mistake? Or, and this is the interesting part, was that time away, that experience building NeXT and Pixar from scratch, exactly what he needed? Was that the crucible that forged him into the legendary leader who could come back and save Apple? It's the ultimate what if, and honestly, it's something people are going to be arguing about forever.